All right, at this time, we're going to move to Wildlife Management Committee. Trey Teague, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman McMillan. This time I'd like to recognize Dr. Craig Harper, professor at the University of Tennessee Forestry, Wildlife, and Fisheries Department.
Thank you, Commissioner Teague, and let me also begin by thanking Darrell Radijak, the Wildlife Division Chief, for inviting me to come over and share some information with you all related to a program that we've had going on for 30-plus years that the TWRA has supported throughout this time, a youth education program that many of you may not be familiar with or may not know what is going on with it now. And I've been involved with this since I came to Tennessee in 1998, and it's really been a nice process, a nice program to work on. Now, somebody might need to show how to tighten this up. That'll be good. The Wildlife Habitat Education Program, WHEP, as we call it, is a conservation education program that's available for youth. It's an officially sanctioned 4-H program, but it's also available for FFA students to take as well. And as you can see, 4th graders through 12th graders are enabled to participate. And many of you are probably familiar with different environmental programs that are implemented across Tennessee. The difference in this is that we take that environmental message, we give that, but we expand on it to actually teach wildlife management. And I'll go through some specifics of that here in just a minute. We teach not only wildlife management in terms of populations, but also habitat. And in fact, it concentrates on wildlife habitat. We implement the program in a contest format, and it's conducted at local, state, and national levels. WHEP actually began in Tennessee in 1998. A predecessor of mine, Dr. Jim Byford, that many of you probably know, was the Extension Wildlife Specialist back then. And he and Dr. Tom Hill, who was the Extension Fisheries Specialist, they had been at, of course, UT for a while and had seen the popularity of the agricultural 4-H judging programs. Cattle judging, horse judging, there's even swine and poultry judging events, and these were wildly popular, especially through the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they wanted to do something to get kids involved. Well, of course, it's difficult to go out there and lasso a deer and bring it in to measure its hocks or whatever, so they thought instead of having them, quote, judge the animals, we can have them judge habitat, a way to get them outside and teach them something about the outdoors as well as the wildlife that's associated with it. So they implemented this program. It was called the Tennessee 4-H Wildlife Judging Program in Tennessee from 1978 through, and it's still going on now, but after they had implemented it for about 10 years, it began to become quite popular in some other states surrounding land-grant universities, extension programs such as Auburn, Mississippi State, Georgia. They also began to implement this. And in 1987, they started what was called the Southeast Regional Contest. They had a Southern Invitational. Well, this went on for a couple of years, and by that time, others in Nebraska and Texas, Wyoming, North Dakota, etc., they began to get interested in this. And a national contest was held for the first time in 1989. When they started the national contest, they renamed it the Wildlife Habitat Evaluation Program, which later evolved into the Wildlife Habitat Education Program. So that's what we're talking about today. In 1991, they formed a manual, a written manual for the program, which had begun as the Tennessee manual that Drs. Byford and Hill used, but they expanded on that, and the program grew, and it's gotten a lot of accolades, especially the Wildlife Society Conservation Education Award, and just a couple of years ago recognized as a National 4-H Program of Distinction. Now, let me go through a little bit about what the program covers and how we implement it. To begin, we teach kids about terms and concepts related to wildlife management. And we begin with things such as the species and population. We expand out to communities and have how different communities then can form an ecosystem, and there's various ecosystems across the landscape. Now, we then go into the various species, talk about their habitat requirements, how some species are used to or have to have grasslands, for example, or woodlands, et cetera, and how they have differences in their habitat requirements. We teach them about the successional process, how if you have a field and you don't do anything with it, over a few years it becomes brushy, ultimately into woods, and how this differs from area to area. And then there's a lot of other specific things here that we really get to them at in terms of ecology of systems. Then we show them how different regions, how there are different regions across the country. And the WHEP manual breaks the country up into 16 ecoregions. Our ecoregion is termed the Eastern Deciduous Forest. North of us is the Northeast Deciduous Forest. South would be the Southeast Mixed Forest. Once you get out into west of Missouri and Iowa, Kansas, there's the Great Plains, tall grassland ecoregion. Down in Texas, there's prairie brushland and woodland. You get the picture. It's all broken up across the country. And for each region, ecoregion, we give them a physical description of the area, teach them about the dominant vegetation, the successional process, how that changes from region to region, various plants that are there, and then they are given wildlife species that are representative of those regions. In the Eastern Deciduous Forest ecoregion, we have 19 species. And you see here, black bear, of course, is one of those. And then we also show them not only is the region comprised just of mature hardwoods, but we talk about the importance of young hardwoods, early succession, etc. We then go into various species. So, for example, of those 19 species that's in the Eastern Deciduous Forest ecoregion, northern bobwhite is one of them. They learn about the general information, what this species is, where it occurs, learn about its habitat requirements, and then we go into wildlife management practices, how different practices are used to manage both the habitat as well as the populations of these species. There's 138 different species that are included in the National Manual. However, within each state, they only have to learn about the ones that are representative of the ecoregion they're in, unless they go to a different ecoregion for a contest. And I'll explain that in just a minute. So now, we've covered the ecology. We've shown them how there are different regions across the country. We've shown them representative species of each of those regions, told them about their habitat requirements, and explained how different practices are needed for those different species. Of those practices, there are 33 of them. And for an example, here in the Eastern Deciduous Forest, one of them is forest management. We talked to them about forest management, explains things such as forest regeneration as one component of forest management. And if you're not ready to regenerate a forest through these different regeneration methods, and they actually learn what a clear cut, a shelter wood, a group selection, etc. are, they also learn that if a forest is not ready to regenerate, you can still improve it. And so we talk to them about timber stand improvement practices, various thinnings that can be implemented, how prescribed fire might be implemented to achieve certain objectives. And of course, the effect on habitat, the food, cover, water resources, how habitat is influenced by these different wildlife management practices, and how the influences of the practices vary according to which species you're talking about. Of course, an eastern gray squirrel would not benefit from the same practices that an eastern meadowlark might. Then we move into the activities. This is the basis, the base information that they've learned, the ecology, the areas, the vegetation, concepts and terms, the species. Now they get to apply this knowledge in a series of activities. The first one is what we call the Wildlife Challenge. In the Wildlife Challenge, they will go into a room, or it might be outside. We might take them along a trail and have stations set up. We might have skulls, specimens, feathers, pictures, or maybe even a recording of the songs, for example, of a grasshopper sparrow, as you see here. They have to identify the species and then answer questions related to management for that species. For example, right here, we could have a grasshopper sparrow specimen for them, or a recording of the song. They would identify that and then answer a question related to how grazing native grasses might improve habitat for grasshopper sparrows. The next activity is on-site recommendation of wildlife management practices. And so we move from the Wildlife Challenge and we take them to a particular area, outside. And we give them boundaries. Here's the area that you're supposed to judge, and we give them a list of species. And and I'll get to these different contests, but let's say, for example, in a regional contest, they would have about 5 to 8 different species that they would judge this area as habitat for each of those species. And so here you see a picture of a young lady. She has her answer sheet there. And on one side is the list of the wildlife management practices. On the upper side is the list of wildlife species. And she's simply putting a check in the box on the chart as to which wildlife management practices she would recommend for those different wildlife species on that area right there. That is where the foundation of the program began in terms of judging habitat for these different species. And we also give them population scenarios, such as white-tailed deer have been damaging soybean fields, or have browsed out the understory of a forest, etc. One of the practices would be included is increased harvest, and so they could mark increased harvest to reduce the deer population to address the habitat effects. Just an example. Those are things that we do at our regional contest, and I'll show you a list of that in just a second. But at our state contest and at the national contest, the participants will also get to provide a written wildlife management plan. And this is a team event where each of the teams, they will go to yet another area, and we will give them a written scenario, usually about 3 paragraphs or so long, and talk to them about where this area is, what the landowners are looking for, what kind of objectives they have, and then different situations that might be going on that property. And so then they write a written plan for those species and that property. And of course, this incorporates not only their reasoning skills, but also written skills as well, and they have to work together as a team. Once we get finished with that, then we go inside, and sometimes we'll have outside stations, and each of the participants sit in front of a panel of 2 judges. And there will be 4 2-judge panels, so each participant will go in front of a different panel of judges, and the judges will ask them questions related to their written management plan. Why did you prescribe this, or why did you recommend that? And then they get a chance to verbally reason why they did each of these things, and so that helps with their oral communication skills as well. Now, that is done at the national level, but specifically here in Tennessee, the conduit, the structure for the program is provided through University of Tennessee Extension. And so these are programs that extension agents across the state implement as part of their job. And of course, extension educators go into the public school systems, and they provide different programming within the schools. This is certainly one of those, as well as work with a lot of homeschool kids as well. We use the national manual in Tennessee, even though we keep the name that we've had for several years, and we have about 300 kids go through the program each year, which is a good group of youth. We have 3 regional contests. within each county, they'll have local competitions to decide who's on the teams, and they might have multiple teams, who is the A team, the B team, the C team, etc. And then we'll have a regional contest in the western region, one in the central region, and one in the eastern region. And then the top 4 teams in each of those regions get invited to our state contest. And we rotate our state contest around the state each year. And generally with 4-person teams, we'll have about 75 youth for the at each regional contest, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 at the state contest. And of course, the winner of the state contest then is able to go on to the national contest, and the national contest is held at different places all over the country. I'll show you a couple pictures. Right here is the McNairy County team, state winning team in 2009. They went to the National Whelp Invitational in Louisiana and won the contest that year. Here's the Putnam County team in 2010 in New Mexico. They actually finished second in New Mexico, but then they got their they came back the next year and won the national contest. And as you can see right there, Tennessee has done very well in the national competition. They've won several in the past few years, placed in the top 5 in 9 out of 10 years, and it's somewhat of a tradition. Now here's what happens at the National Invitation. On day 1, we all get together, and there's what's called a share fair. And all of the teams will get together in a large room, and they'll have tables set up, and they'll bring all kinds of things representative of their state. It might be food items, it might be something related to wildlife, it could be just about anything. And it gives them a chance to all go around and meet each other and eat and greet, etc., and they really enjoy that. They begin to bond a little bit that way. On day 2, we have an educational day, and in whichever state the contest is being held with, we'll have biologists with a state agency come, and we go to a wildlife management area or some spot of the state's choosing, and then biologists will talk to them about the wildlife and about wildlife management in that area. And so they get to learn something about the local area where the contest is being held. And then on day 3, we have the contest, as you can see right here. And this is actually during the written management plan where the participants are all in their teams, and they'll go all about an area and look about it and try to figure out what they want to say, and then they'll sit down and work on their plan. They're given a couple of hours to do this. And then we have the banquet and award ceremony that night. And usually most of the teams will hang around because a lot of them have never been to these places before. And for example, opportunity for some youth from East Tennessee or Southwest Tennessee, wherever the case may be, to get to go to South Louisiana or New Mexico. We've had contests in recent years in Utah and Texas. That's a unique opportunity, and they get to see a lot of things that they haven't seen before and may not get to do again. And so there's a number of benefits, not just conservation education and learning about wildlife. Of course, it gets kids outside. Right here, this is one of my favorites. We had the state contest up at Reelfoot a few years ago. And now this is the day before the contest where we had an educational tour. But when we took them to the area that they were going to judge, we had canoes all laid out. And so all of the kids had to get together and form their own little teams and get in a canoe, and they had to canoe to the area where we're going to judge. And so, wallering around in the mud and splashing around, and then, of course, we had to keep everything in a dry lock box. But once they got there, you got to get them involved. And we do that, and they really enjoy it. But, the other more serious things, I would argue, things like how to get along with others, your team building skills, your oral and written communication skills, critical thinking, etc. Those are important benefits to this contest. We've been doing this a long time, and this would not be possible without the help of the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. The TWRA has helped fund this program ever since its inception, and there are numerous county officers and some of the biologists from across the state who have helped. Not only, maybe we ask somebody to help during a contest, but several of them give up their own time as volunteer leaders with the Extension 4-H agents and help them in training teams. And it's really been a fulfilling program to be involved with over the years. And if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to try and answer.
Commissioners, any questions? Audience? Commissioner McMillan?
Do you have any graduates from your program that's been involved in this that are actually working for the agency now, or do you know?
Yes, there are. And I might also add that we have informally involved some students at universities in wildlife programs in this, and the senior level 4-Hers will commonly outscore some of the wildlife students at the universities. And this has been a great recruiting tool for those kids then to come into UT Martin, Tennessee Tech, UT Knoxville, and get into those wildlife programs, and consistently they have been some of our top performers in our wildlife programs. And I know several of the staff within TWRA, when they were coming up, they were in the 4-H program in their counties and have gone on to work with the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency.
Sounds like they'd be perfect for a private land biologist, and that's kind of what they do for us.
Well, I've helped at the TWRA lands management meeting on a number of occasions, and I know at this last one there was an event, to do different things, and somewhat, I don't remember the name of it, Peter, and the tractor rodeo or whatever that they did. I was talking to John Mike about this. I said, if you would like for me to, I would be more than happy to come and set up a contest so managers from within the regions could form their own teams and compete, in a half-day event in this wildlife judging contest. I think it would be a great chance for them to have a little competition amongst each other and get outside and do something related to wildlife management.
Dr. Harper, is there any other state that's got anywhere close to the record that the University of Tennessee does in terms of winning national championships?
Close, yes, Alabama, but Tennessee has won more national contests than any other state.
I appreciate you taking time to come down.
Thank you
here and
very
talk to
much.
us. Great presentation. Daryl. Next, I'm going to introduce Daryl Radjack, Chief Wildlife.
Thank you, Commissioner Teague. I come before the committee today to discuss two topics. The first I'm going to talk about is give you an update about the Sandhill crane drawing that recently took place. And then I'm going to give you a brief introduction into the TWRA Quail program and give you an update on where that stands. So to kick things off, I wanted to report to the Commission how the Sandhill crane drawing event went. As most of you know, this is a historic year for the agency. This is the first time we're ever having a Sandhill crane hunt in the state of Tennessee. And recently, we conducted the drawing. The Commission permitted 400 individuals to participate in the first ever crane hunt in Tennessee. And we held this drawing event last Saturday, October 12th, in Birchwood, Tennessee. We held it at the Birchwood Community Center, which is also the old elementary school. And I'm happy to report everything went quite well. We're a little worried, so to speak, to begin with, not knowing how many people would show up. We didn't know if they'd have 20 people or 20,000 people. But as you can see, some of the folks started showing up at the doorway at 8 a.m. The doors opened at 8 a.m. and the drawing was to take place at 10 a.m. Throughout the morning, we ended up having 266 people show up for the drawing event. And obviously, when you have less people than the number of permits available, you don't have to have a drawing event. We just gave everyone their permits. But as you can see here from some of the pictures, it was very well attended. I cannot compliment the Region 3 staff enough. They did an excellent job getting people through the door and into the community center and getting them registered. I'd also like to thank Joy Sweeney from the Wildlife Division, who more or less coordinated the whole event, and she did a fantastic job. Commissioner Watson was there on hand. We also had Senator Mike Bell, who also showed up for the drawing event. Another neat thing, and again, I want to credit our IT division. As you know, for this first Sandhill crane season, we require anyone that receives a permit in order to pass a Sandhill crane identification test. We had 10 computer stations set up, and the website was up and functioning for the hunters to come in and take the test and get their identification number, which they would have to put then on their permit that they received. And that ran extremely smoothly. And at the end of the day, instead of drawing the names, we just informed everyone that everyone in the barrel was going to receive the permit. And so we just reformed the lines, and on their way out the door, we handed everyone a permit, which was good for 3 birds. And as you can see, it was a very, very busy day. At the end of the day, obviously, we had leftovers. We had 400 permits, so that meant we had 134 leftover permits. First thing on Monday morning, we put an announcement on our website that the leftover permits would be available on a first-come, first-served basis beginning on Wednesday, October 16th, yesterday. Believe it or not, we did that announcement, and the 134 permits that were left over went in just less than 3 hours. So there are no more Sandhill crane permits available. So needless to say, the drawing event, as well as the leftover permitting process, went fantastic. All 400 permits have been distributed. We've had much greater interest than what Kentucky had in their first year. And so the Sandhill crane hunt will begin November 28th and run through January 1st, and we wish everyone the best of luck in that ordeal. Does anyone have any questions about the drawing event?
I just want to say, I was so impressed with the way y'all organized the leftover part by letting people come to each region office and manipulating it through Region 5. I thought they were just going to be like splitting them up and throwing out and we showed up. So I thought that was a great idea. I don't know who thought of that, but I thought it was awesome.
Again, we talked amongst ourselves, and as we had great regional input, and the decision was we figured there would be most interest in Region 3. If we had divided them up equally, each region would have received 30-some odd permits, and it wouldn't have been fair to Region 3 because I think they had, I don't know how many people showed up at the office. Do you know, John? 88 people. Because of the way we coordinated it through the Nashville office, all the folks there were able to get their permits. Since there was less interest in Regions 1 and 4, we were able to accommodate the folks in Region 3 much better.
How many people showed up after they were all gone? Several, or?
No, I only know of 2 phone calls that were received that they asked were on the way or any permits left that were saying that was
All right, if there's no more questions, I will jump right, oops. I will jump right into providing the commission an update on our Quail program. I know there's a great deal of discussion a year and a half ago during our season setting process regarding the Quail program. And we have been working diligently. We've been working quite some time on the Quail program, and I just want to let you know where we stand right now. Before we get into that, I just want to give you a little bit of history about quail. As everyone knows, quail are struggling. They're a species that require early successional habitat, which is that new growth that Dr. Harper was talking about. It's very difficult to maintain that habitat. And so quail have been on everybody's radar for a number of years. Even in the mid-90s, the Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies had quite a bit of concern about quail, and they created a Southeastern Quail Study Group. And all 13 member states were looking real hard at trying to address the quail situation and try to reverse the trends, because obviously the populations of quail have been declining steadily for a number of decades. And over time, what had occurred is the directors for all the Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies recognized it as a serious problem. And so they took that quail study group meeting and they created this group called the National Bobwhite Quail Initiative, which is NBCI. If I refer to NBCI, that's what it stands for. And what it was instead of just each state trying to conquer their quail problem individually, they brought in all the member states, and it extended beyond the southeastern states. There's midwestern states, northeastern states. So they created this National Bobwhite Quail Initiative to include 25 member states. And what they did is they put together all the leading quail biologists, pulled them from those vast resources of the 25 states, and they sat down and they said, how do we address this quail problem? And so what they came up with was a national plan. And it's an incredibly detailed, very extensive national plan, and they did tremendous work. They went to each and every state, talked to state biologists within each state to develop this plan to address the quail problem. And what they're seeking to do is attack this quail problem on a regional level. Instead of just dealing with Tennessee or just dealing with Florida, they want to attack it wherever the bobwhite quail range was located. And they developed this map, which more or less shows where are you most likely to restore quail. And it's habitat-based. It's based on that early successional need that quail have. And as you see from the map, there's some states that have higher potential than other states. Obviously, the Midwestern states, when you look at the Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas, they got a lot of that prairie area, which tends to be much better suited for quail. And then along the southeastern coast, the shortleaf pine region, throughout the Carolinas, Georgia, and Alabama, there's also really good habitat. And Tennessee is somewhere in between there. We do have some good spots, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the problems that Tennessee faces. So all the leading quail biologists from all 25 member states got together and developed this plan. Now, besides mapping out where quail could be restored or should be restored, they wanted to put together guidance on how to restore quail. And it's a simple formula. You create quail habitat. If you build it, they will come. But it had to be more involved than that. You couldn't just say put in quail habitat. You need to know how much, what's the best type of quail habitat available. And so they developed some guidelines within this national plan. And literally what came out of it is kind of what's really hurting Tennessee right now. All the leading experts say in order to have sustainable populations of quail, you have to have some bare minimums. And what they call for is 1,500 acres minimum of good quality quail habitat. This is that early successional habitat that's very difficult to maintain. If you don't have 1,500 contiguous acres of good quail habitat, then if 25% of your landscape consists of that type of habitat, then you could also have some really good sustainable quail populations. And so using that number, still shooting for the 1,500 acres, you would literally need 6,000 acres of land, 25% of which would be good quail habitat, in order to have a robust, healthy quail population. And right off the bat, that's a lot of land. There's few places in Tennessee that have that much land dedicated to early successional habitat. And so looking at the map of Tennessee, I pulled this directly out of that map that you just saw beforehand. This is what the biologists, and this included Tennessee biologists, put together as where's the best places for quail to be restored. And obviously the blue is what is selected as the highest priority places to restore quail. And as you can see, there's a big swath in West Tennessee. How many farmers in West Tennessee are willing to give up their high productivity farmland in order to put in 1,500 acres of quail habitat? It's very, very difficult. We also have spaces up on the Highland Rim and in the Ridge and Valley area. The problem with that is the further you go east, the smaller the land size, the farm sizes get. The average farm size in Tennessee, I believe, is around 110 or 130 acres. And so that is so far below what is required to sustain really good quail populations. It takes a lot of work to get all those individual farmers lined up in order to put all that habitat on the ground. So this is part of the reason why it's so difficult to restore quail in Tennessee, is because it requires such large acreages, and where we have those, it's very difficult in Tennessee to find those large acreages to really address the quail problem. And so the issue boils down to scale. What happens if you don't have 1,500 acres to work with, or 6,000 acres to work with? What can we do to address quail on a smaller scale? What if we only have a 200-acre farm or a 500-acre farm? Is there things we could do, not just habitat-wise, but harvest-wise or disease, or is there predator issues? What happens on those smaller scales that we're not addressing right now? And so what we did over the last 2 years, since the commission put this on the radar, is we started working with NBCI and asking them for help. We say, we have this issue with scale. Most of the places in Tennessee, we cannot meet those minimums. How do we manage quail when we have such smaller parcels of land? And I personally have attended the management board meetings. We've attended a steering committee meeting. We took 5 or 6 of our biologists to the steering committee meeting, which so happened to be hosted in Knoxville at the time. And we asked them to look at that. And where they told us that they want us to draw up some ideas that they will consider putting into the national plan. And so we're still in the process of working with the NBCI to address this issue of scale, because as that national plan is written, it really does not provide much guidance for the state of Tennessee. And so we're going to continue to work with NBCI to hopefully address this issue and get that rectified. Now, that leads us to the Tennessee Quail Plan. Did I mention I'm not a quail biologist? My specialty is deer, but I put this picture up there to bring up a very, very important point. There has been talk in every state throughout the years about getting advice to manage things differently, because the public sees magazines, they see hunting shows, and they want us to manage for things that they covet. Whether or not it's a giant deer, they believe that we can adjust our regulations and produce giant deer. It doesn't work that way. There's so many things that go into producing that deer that it's just not a quick fix with regulations or even a simple habitat management fix. There's a lot of things that go into play. And so what I did when I was the big game coordinator is I really tried to address the hunters and let them know about realistic expectations. They got to understand what they're capable of, and if they do what they're capable of, what realistically should they expect? Because the worst thing we could do is get the hunters believing that they can expect animals like this, and then when they go out there and they don't get it, that's when the satisfaction rates for our agency go down. The good thing is, throughout all the surveys that the University of Tennessee conducts, TWRA's satisfaction rating is way up there. Over 80% for how we manage wildlife, close to 80% for how we manage deer, 90% for how we manage turkey. One of the bad ones is quail. The satisfaction rate for quail is way down, and it could be because people have unrealistic expectations. And so what we're trying to do is we need to get people to realize, because of the time we live in, we're not going back to the glory days of quail. We are not going to be walking out in the fields with quail flushing under every footstep. When that occurred back in the mid-20th century, the culture was different. The farming methods were different. It was dirty farming. There was quail habitat all over the state. Because of the Industrial Revolution and the modernization of farming equipment, we go from row crop field to forest. There is no early successional habitat unless you work for it. And again, it's very difficult to maintain. And so we literally, over the years, over the decades, we have spent millions of dollars trying to put in quail habitat, and we haven't really seen any response on the landscape. And our guys, we have private land biologists, a lot what Dr. Harper was talking about, and Commissioner McMillan, you mentioned we have people out there that are trying to get landowners to put in quail habitat. And it's great. However, when they do it on a small farm, there's really no landscape effect to the populations of quail. It may benefit that individual farm, but it's not going to really do much for the total quail population. And so, for 6 years, we've struggled with the Tennessee Quail Plan. It was an undertaking prior to me becoming the chief of wildlife, and we got all the folks within the regions and in the wildlife division to sit down and come up with the dream quail plan that was going to restore quail throughout the state of Tennessee. And they worked on it for, I believe, 1.5 years, maybe even 2 years, and they put together an amazing plan. It was a very thick, detailed document about everything that needs to be done to really do something for quail. And then something bad happened. We put the numbers to it, and we said, man, we're going to spend millions and millions of dollars just trying to do this for quail. And the big thing was, when you asked the biologist, would this restore quail? There was barely anyone that believed it would really have any positive impact on the overall landscape. And so that caused us to go back to the drawing board and really take a look at things. And what we wanted to do, and we've been working over the last 1.5 years, is to devise a new quail plan, one with more or less realistic expectations. We cannot trick people to think that we're going to restore quail across our landscape. And so what we did, we have one simple goal for our new quail plan. And it sounds kind of pessimistic, but this is literally, really the only thing we can do. Our agency is going to strive to curb the decline of quail populations in focal areas. And what I mean by that is our agency can only control areas that we manage. We can have an impact, we can make a difference in those areas. Yes, we'd like to increase the quail populations there. We will do the best of our ability to create the habitat on those areas. Now, if you look at the quail plan, there's 2 objectives. The first one is to manage habitats and hunting pressure on anchor WMAs to produce bobwhite populations that serve as source populations for surrounding landscapes. In other words, we're going to find those WMAs that are conducive to managing for quail and make sure they're of sufficient size to really make a difference. And we're going to focus all of our efforts in those few areas. And what the charge is more or less select a couple areas within each region to really serve as the anchor WMAs in each of those regions. Our other objective is to encourage the management of early and mid-successional habitat on private lands. This is what a lot of our PLBs do out there. And we want to focus those efforts around the anchor WMAs, because those anchor WMAs will serve as a source population to hopefully bring quail in a much larger area across the landscape. Now, where we are right now, we're in the midst of developing this operational plan. We have quite a bit of it developed already, but I'll give you the idea of how it is supposed to work. Over the last numerous decades, again, we have spent millions of dollars trying to put quail habitat on the landscape, and we really have had no effect on quail populations. It's because of this. Each of those red dots represents an area where we tried to put in quail habitat. Now, the size of those dots matters not. It's not standardized for the size. So some of those places could have been 50 acres, some of those could have been 200 acres, some of them could have been 5 acres. The fact of the matter is, it's scattered all about. Based on the information from NBCI, you need 1,500 acres. And so those little dots, as much work and time and money that's invested in there, really is not impacting quail. And so the idea with this new plan is to really pick these anchor areas, pick these areas where we're really going to make a difference with the quail populations. And instead of the shotgun approach, we bring it all together to create the size that's necessary in order to sustain viable quail populations. Now, don't get me wrong, we will still help out wherever we can throughout the entire state. If someone wants to manage for quail, we could provide the technical advice. But for our agency, we really got to focus our efforts so we have an impact on the animals we're trying to help. Now, going back to the objectives, the first objective, obviously, is for public lands. These are lands that we own or we manage, and we can have an impact there. The problem is that second objective is private lands. And no matter how much we try, we actually have no power over private lands. all we could do is influence what happens on private lands. And we've been trying for a long time to get people to put in quail habitat, but it's quite difficult. So how do we propose to impact private lands? Well, there's an idea we've been tossing about, and I'm not going to go into much detail because we don't have a lot of detail about it. But it's an idea. We had a few meetings kind of trying to flesh this out, this wildlife stewardship program. And what the idea is, if you look at what we've done over the years, we try to get private landowners to put in good wildlife habitat, or good quail habitat. We're going to call it wildlife habitat from here on out, so we can target everyone. But pretty much what these programs are, the CRP programs, you have all the Farm Bill incentives where we pay landowners to put in habitat that is really good for wildlife. The problem is it misses the mark for two primary reasons. First off, the target audience seems to be oftentimes farmers. As you know, farmers are trying to make money off their land. That's their primary goal. And so when things are bad and we can pay farmers to put in good habitat, they will put in good habitat. But when things turn around and they can make more money off soybean or corn, that habitat tends to come out quite quickly. We also see a lot of land being torn out, especially in West Tennessee right now, because there's just too much money to be made by farming the land. The other problem with this program is the incentive that's behind it is financially based. The problem is that money is not always going to be around. As you know, Congress is tied up, and we're always threatened with cutting the Farm Bill program. The other thing is when crop prices do go up, we are oftentimes on the short end of the deal, and they just go where the money's at. And there's no fault or anything to them. That's exactly what they're there for. And so we sat down and started thinking, well, how do we get more quality quail or quality wildlife habitat on the ground? There's only one group of people that really cares about the wildlife out there. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's a number, but the biggest group by far are the hunters. If you sit back and think about how many people that hunt invest thousands upon thousands of dollars in their leases or on their land, putting in food plots, doing all sorts of habitat management for the purpose of hunting, there's real potential out there if we can influence those guys to put in a slightly different habitat. Then we might be able to have some impact. But the problem is we don't want to do this financial-based incentive because it's fraught with some problems, because even hunters would take more money if they could get it. And so what we thought of with this new program is the very basic idea of this is if a landowner who primarily uses their land for hunting purposes, whether or not they own it, whether or not they lease it, or a family member owns it, if the primary purpose of that land is to hunt on it, if we could get them to provide the proper wildlife habitat that we're looking for, and from the gates, this will primarily be based on quail, and so we'd have certain percentages in early successional habitat or habitat that's really conducive to good quail populations. Is there an incentive that we could offer the hunters to get them to do that? And obviously it boiled down to hunting opportunity. Would hunters, instead of paying them with money, would they want more days of field? Would they want increased bag limits? Would they want release of some of the weapon restrictions? We don't know. And so we all sat down as an agency, included wildlife personnel, law enforcement personnel from all 4 regions in Nashville, and we had an idea. Let's ask the hunters. First off, let's ask the hunters if this program is something they'd be interested in, and if they are interested in it, what type of habitat work would you be willing to do? What type of incentives would be most important to you? And we haven't sent out this survey yet. We plan on doing a random survey of our license database. We're also going to do a volunteer survey where we put this up on the internet and we advertise it and we try to get as much input as possible. And so probably within the next month or 2, you will see a survey going out asking this question. This is my opportunity to advise you of what you see and you understand what's going on when you do see it. But recently, 2 days ago, I was in Oklahoma City sitting with all of the wildlife chiefs from all the southeastern associations. And we had talked about this plan, and there's a number of chiefs that were really liking this idea, getting away from the financial base and going towards some of these hunting incentives. And lo and behold, I did not know it, but the chief from Texas, and I forget Matt's last name, but he's the chief of wildlife from Texas, he said, you're onto it. That's what they started in Texas. It's called the MLD program. It's the Managed Lands Deer Permit Program. He says it's their most popular program. Literally what it involves, and I'm going to jump real quickly to something. Literally what it involves in Texas is that they write a management plan for the farm or for the land in question, and if they meet all the requirements and it's approved of by the state agency, then that property is granted additional hunting privileges. The big incentive in Texas is more antlerless tags, but the bigger thing is more buck tags. But anyway, this goes to show that other states have done this before, and Texas is doing it. Matt from Tennessee, or from Texas, said their biggest problem with this program, it's too popular. Right now, they're having a hard time keeping up with it. They had, I believe, over 100,000 acres of land enrolled in their program because the hunters are managing their lands. They want to get these additional hunting incentives, and they'll do whatever you ask them to do. And so they're just trying right now to have enough personnel to keep that program afloat because they're writing so many plans. So if you see or hear about any work that we're doing within the next few months regarding a wildlife stewardship program or some of the different things we're doing with our WMAs for quail, this is all in an effort to begin impacting not just the lands on our property that we control and manage. We're going to do that. We have the plan to do that. And those are going to meet the NBCI standards. But then there's going to be this effort to try to get more private properties enrolled. But we first want to see what all the hunters of Tennessee would like to see out of a program if we do develop one. With that, that's all I have to offer. Any questions?
Anybody from the commission?
Darrell, have y'all thought or considered or discussed what the minimum acreage you're gonna be involved in?
We thought about all of that stuff. We haven't decided on anything, and there's arguments. I believe the last we left it is, it was gonna be close to the average farm size of Tennessee, so somewhere around 100 acres. But the one thing that we did discuss is it doesn't have to be one landowner. You could have multiple landowners all enrolled, and as long as they meet the minimum requirements, they'd be able to do it. But again, none of the program has been fleshed out in detail. We kind of want to do the survey first just to see if the hunters would be interested in a program like this. I believe they will, but it'd be really good to find out what exactly, because the last thing we want to do is offer them a chocolate cake when all they wanted was a little carrot. And so there's a lot to find out from a survey.
So, I mean, some of it may be, like you said, releasing some weapon restrictions, but other people may actually want more doe tags, more buck tags.
Yes,
that sort of
and
thing.
that's what the survey is going to let us know. What is most important to the Tennessee hunters? Believe it or not, we have very liberal seasons, but we're always asking to increase the season, start earlier or end later. And so additional days in the field may not be, it probably won't impact the resource, because the more days you have, the less likely you are to go every day. It just gives you more opportunity to pick the days you want to go. But this survey is designed to find out what would be most important to the hunters and what are they willing to do and what are they expecting out of it.
And basically, the only cost to the agency would be more or less supervising it, since we're not really going to be investing.
Well, it definitely would. Anyone that would enroll in that program, if it gets developed, would need to be inspected by either an officer or a biologist to see if they met the requirements. But there's a ton of details. But the very first step we want to take is find out if there's interest in a program and whether or not we should continue pursuing it. Because if we find out that they really want to do it, we don't want to invest the time trying to create this program.
I mean, I know a lot of times we try to set up habitat for our deer, seems because that's the most popular animal, but what's the ability to create habitat for quail that will cross over and actually be good for deer also?
Well, if you look at how much money, and I should probably call up Dr. Harper to talk about this, but there are so many folks, so many leases where they're intensively managing those properties for deer. And oftentimes, food usually isn't the most important thing. Cover oftentimes is a huge benefit to deer properties. And providing quail habitat is really providing good cover for the deer and turkey. So just talking to the landowners and say, well, instead of planting this 20-acre field, why don't you let it go for a couple of years? Or put in, one of the things we'd like to see is advise them to get any fields that are in fescue out of fescue and into native warm season grasses. So there's just too much detail about how this would be created. I couldn't give you any specifics, but there's a lot of folks that are excited about where we could go with this. But the first group of people we want to ask are the hunters to see if they'd be interested in something like this.
I think this is, you're not saying 1,000 acres minimum or something. I think you're
No,
gonna get a
no,
good
no. We
response.
want to make it so it's doable for the common hunter.
The focus is not going to necessarily be on quail, is that correct?
I will not mention the word quail at all. That's why we call it the Wildlife Stewardship Program. The impetus for this whole idea was to try to get more quail habitat out there, but the prescription for quail benefits the whole suite of species, deer, turkey, songbirds, you name it. And so it's wildlife habitat. And so even a deer and turkey hunters, our private land biologists, when they go out there and you have the landowner asking, how do I manage better for deer and turkey? Oftentimes they're giving them the quail prescription and it works wonderful.
Darrell, I applaud the creativity of what this thing could be for private land, and I agree with you 100% that step one is touching base with the hunters. That being said, it would seem like this could be implemented in phases. You brought up a great point in your slides. First is we can do something with the public land, and I'd like to know when that could be implemented. And the second is, you said, curb the decline. What's your yardstick? How's that going to be done? Because and bear with me just a second. This discussion has been going on since I've been on 2 commissions. And I would like to see us in the next 12 months, if not, and I say 12 months just because we're entering the winter season, but if we really believe that this is both a public and private land venture, my hope is that you can tell us that within the next 12 months, there's going to be an aggressive plan to attack our public lands. And I'll hush.
Absolutely. And I believe we've done, I hope I did not give the impression that we're not doing anything on our public lands. I could probably ask any one of our regional managers to come up and they could tell you right off the bat their WMAs. I believe Scott Dykes will be talking about Buffalo Springs. We've done quite a bit of work on our lands. This is just going to be increasing that effort, more or less define, this is our anchor WMA, this is going to be where all the work takes place, and then redirecting all that effort, because scattering it out across the landscape, and we've been doing a tremendous amount of work, but it really needs to be focused much better, and we will have that. The operational plan, it's in draft form, and I don't want to show it to anyone right now, but we have those areas identified. A big thing is the monitoring. We got to know if we're having an impact, and monitoring the quail is just as important as putting in the habitat, because if what we're doing is not doing anything for the population, we can spend our money much better elsewhere.
Darrell, forgive me, I kind of set you up. We have a tendency to be our own worst cheerleaders, and it needs to be heard that we are doing things on our WMAs right now. I don't think that's being heard, and again, we're not the best cheerleaders for ourselves, but this is one area. We've had Ron Crabtree at every meeting. In fact, I'm floored he's not here today. And we need to actively let folks know what we're doing, and I think actively know, and if there's a way to get it on the web, I'm not going to get into micromanaging, but the idea that you all have come up with is tremendous. The fact we're attacking the public lands is tremendous, and if we can get folks some kind of feel for how this thing's going to manifest itself, I think there's a lot more credit to be gained by you and the staff and the WMA managers than the public knows right now.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I think Scott Dykes will really show you some of the work that has taken place on our WMAs.